The grand ballroom of Ashford Manor glittered with 1,000 candles, their light dancing across silk gowns and jewelled throats. Lady Evangeline Hartley stood at the altar, her hands trembling beneath her bouquet of white roses, waiting for the man who would never come. The Duke of Ravenscroft had made his choice, and it wasn't her. Before 300 witnesses, before the cream of London society, he turned his back and walked away with her own cousin on his arm. But as Evangeline's world shattered into 1,000 pieces, none could have known the terrible truth. Within a year, a curse would begin to consume him, and only the woman whose tears he dismissed would hold the key to his salvation. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. The morning of Evangeline Hartley's wedding day began, as all mornings at Hartley House did, with precision, propriety, and the weight of expectation pressing down like the grey London sky above. She woke before dawn in her childhood bedroom, the pale blue walls seeming to close in around her as they never had before. Through the tall windows, she could see the manicured gardens stretching toward the iron gates that separated her family's Mayfair estate from the bustling streets beyond. How many times had she gazed through those windows, dreaming of the day she would leave this house as a bride. Now that the day had arrived, she felt nothing but a cold, creeping dread she couldn't name. "Miss Evangeline, you must eat something," her lady's maid, Mary, urged, setting down a tray of tea and toast that Evangeline couldn't bear to touch. "I'm not hungry, Mary. Thank you." The older woman's face softened with concern, but she said nothing more. What could she say? This marriage had been arranged since Evangeline was 17, negotiated over port and cigars in her father's study, while she sat in the drawing room, practicing her needlework and pretending not to strain her ears toward the heavy oak door. The Duke of Ravenscroft, Sterling Ashford, the most eligible bachelor in England, they said, wealthy beyond measure, with estates spanning 3 counties and a lineage that traced back to the Conquest. Dark-haired and striking, with eyes the colour of storm clouds, and a bearing that commanded every room he entered. Evangeline had met him only a handful of times before their engagement was announced. He had been courteous, certainly, proper. He had kissed her hand with the exact degree of pressure that etiquette demanded, had made conversation about the weather and the season's opera performances, had never once looked at her with anything resembling warmth. But she had told herself that warmth would come, that affection would grow, that the fairy tales she'd read as a girl, hidden beneath her bedcovers by candlelight, might still come true in some fashion. "Your mother is asking for you, miss," Mary said quietly, helping Evangeline into her dressing gown. "She's in the blue parlour." Evangeline found Lady Hartley surrounded by tissue paper and ribbon, supervising the final preparations with the intensity of a general marshalling troops. Her mother had always been a handsome woman, tall and regal, with the same auburn hair that Evangeline had inherited, though now threaded with distinguished silver. "There you are, darling. Come, let me look at you." Lady Hartley took her daughter's hands, her expression unreadable. "Today you become a duchess. Do you understand what that means?" "Yes, Mama. It means duty, Evangeline. It means sacrifice. It means putting your husband's name and reputation above all else, including your own desires." Her mother's grip tightened, almost imperceptibly. "The Duke of Ravenscroft is not a man given to displays of emotion. He is proud, exacting, and he expects perfection. You must be the perfect wife to him." "I will try, Mama. You will succeed." Lady Hartley released her hands and turned back to the boxes. "Your cousin Rosalind has arrived. She's waiting in the morning room. She was quite insistent about seeing you before the ceremony." Evangeline felt a small flutter of genuine pleasure. Rosalind Pemberton, her mother's niece, had been her closest companion since childhood. Where Evangeline was reserved and dutiful, Rosalind was vivacious and bold, with golden curls and bright blue eyes that seemed to sparkle with perpetual mischief. She had been travelling abroad for the past year, and Evangeline had missed her terribly. She found Rosalind standing by the window, dressed in a gown of pale pink silk that complemented her porcelain complexion perfectly. When she turned, her smile was dazzling. "Evie! Oh, let me look at you!" Rosalind rushed forward, taking both of Evangeline's hands in hers. "A bride at last. I'm so sorry I couldn't return sooner. Paris was absolutely divine, but I wouldn't have missed this day for the world." "I'm so glad you're here," Evangeline said, and meant it. "I've felt quite alone in all of this." Something flickered across Rosalind's face, too quick to identify. "Alone? But surely the Duke has been attentive. He's been appropriate." Evangeline chose her words carefully. "We don't know each other well yet, but I suppose that will come with time." "Of course it will." Rosalind squeezed her hands. "And you'll be a duchess. Think of it, Evie. You'll have everything you could possibly want." "Yes," Evangeline said softly. "Everything." The hours that followed passed in a blur of preparation. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and Brussels lace, with a train that required 3 attendants to manage. Pearls had been woven into her hair, and her mother's diamond necklace, a Hartley family heirloom, glittered at her throat. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the pale, wide-eyed creature staring back. "You look like a princess from a storybook," Mary whispered, tears in her eyes. But Evangeline felt like a doll, beautiful and lifeless, being dressed for display. The carriage ride to St. George's Church in Hanover Square seemed both endless and far too short. Her father sat across from her, resplendent in his formal attire, his expression proud and satisfied. He had secured an alliance with one of England's most powerful families. His daughter's happiness was a secondary consideration at best. "You've done well, Evangeline," he said, as the church spires came into view. "The Hartley name will be elevated by this union. Your children will be among the most influential in the realm." Children. With a man who looked at her as though she were a piece of furniture he'd been obliged to purchase. The church was packed with London's elite, a sea of silk and jewels and barely concealed curiosity. Evangeline could feel their eyes on her as she walked down the aisle, her hand resting lightly on her father's arm. The organs swelled with Handel, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the murmur of approval from the assembled guests. At the altar stood the Duke of Ravenscroft. Sterling Ashford was 30 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of aristocratic features that painters loved. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and those penetrating grey eyes that seemed to see through everything and everyone. His dark hair was swept back from his forehead, and he wore his formal attire with the casual elegance of a man born to privilege. He did not smile as Evangeline approached. He simply watched her, his expression as cold and unreadable as marble. She took her place beside him, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain everyone in the church must hear it. The Archbishop of Canterbury began the ceremony, his voice echoing through the vaulted space, but Evangeline heard none of it. She was too focused on the man beside her, trying desperately to find some warmth, some hint of affection in his face. There was nothing. "If any person can show just cause why these two may not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. And then Sterling Ashford, Duke of Ravenscroft, turned to face the congregation. "I cannot do this," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. "I cannot marry Lady Evangeline Hartley." The world seemed to tilt beneath Evangeline's feet. She heard gasps, shocked whispers, her mother's strangled cry of horror, but all she could see was Sterling's face, cold and resolute, as he looked not at her, but past her, to someone in the crowd. "I am in love with another," he continued, each word falling like a stone into still water, "and I will not dishonor her or myself by proceeding with this farce." Evangeline followed his gaze and felt her heart shatter completely. He was looking at Rosalind. Her cousin stood in the third pew, her face flushed, her eyes bright with tears, but not tears of sympathy, tears of joy. "Your Grace, this is highly irregular," the Archbishop began, but Sterling cut him off. Miss Rosalind Pemberton has agreed to be my wife. We have been corresponding for the past year, and I have come to realize that she is the only woman I could ever love." He finally looked at Evangeline, and his expression was one of cool disdain. "I'm sorry, Lady Evangeline, but surely you must have known this marriage was a mistake. We have nothing in common, no affection for one another. Better to end it now than condemn us both to a lifetime of misery." Evangeline couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The church had erupted into chaos. Her father shouting, her mother weeping, guests standing and craning their necks for a better view of the scandal unfolding before them. And through it all, Sterling Ashford walked down the aisle, his hand extended toward Rosalind, who took it without hesitation. Evangeline stood frozen at the altar, her white roses trembling in her hands, as the man who was supposed to be her husband walked away with her own cousin, leaving her alone before 300 witnesses to her humiliation. The silence that followed Sterling and Rosalind's departure lasted only a heartbeat before the church exploded into pandemonium. Evangeline stood motionless at the altar, her white roses slipping from nerveless fingers to scatter across the marble floor. The Archbishop stared after the departed Duke with an expression of profound shock, his prayer book hanging forgotten in his hands. Around her, 300 guests erupted into a cacophony of gasps, whispers, and barely suppressed exclamations of disbelief. "Evangeline!" Her mother's voice cut through the chaos, sharp with hysteria. Lady Hartley pushed through the crowd, her face drained of all colour. "Evangeline, come away from there at once!" But Evangeline couldn't move. Her legs had turned to stone, rooting her to the spot where she had expected to become a duchess, and had instead become the greatest scandal London had witnessed in a generation. "This is an outrage!" Her father's voice boomed through the church as he stormed toward the doors through which Sterling and Rosalind had vanished. "An absolute outrage! I'll have satisfaction for this insult. The Duke will answer for this humiliation." "Papa, please," Evangeline whispered, but her voice was so faint that no one heard. The guests were standing now, craning their necks, their faces alight with the kind of avid curiosity that feeds on others' misfortune. Evangeline could see Lady Pemberton, Rosalind's mother, sitting in stunned silence, her hand pressed to her mouth. Had she known? Had any of them known? A year of correspondence, Sterling had said. A year of secret letters while Rosalind travelled through Paris, while Evangeline prepared for a wedding that had been nothing but a cruel charade. "Move aside! Let me through!" A familiar voice rang out, and suddenly Aunt Agatha was there, her tall, angular frame cutting through the crowd like a ship through troubled waters. Agatha Hartley, her father's elder sister, had always been the family's eccentric, a widow who had refused to remarry, who travelled alone, who said exactly what she thought regardless of propriety. She reached Evangeline and immediately wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, blocking her from the prying eyes of the crowd. "Come, child, we're leaving." "I can't. The guests can go to the devil," Agatha said firmly, her grey eyes blazing with fury. "You owe them nothing. Hold your head high, Evangeline. You have done nothing wrong." But as Agatha guided her down the aisle, Evangeline felt the weight of every stare, heard the whispers that followed in her wake like a poisonous fog. "Poor thing, left at the altar. I heard the Duke and the cousin have been lovers for months." She must have known, surely. How absolutely mortifying. The Hartley family will never recover from this disgrace. Each word was a knife, slicing through what remained of Evangeline's composure. By the time they reached the church doors, tears were streaming down her face, hot and bitter, blurring her vision. The street outside was chaos. Sterling's carriage was already disappearing around the corner, carrying him and Rosalind away from the wreckage they had created. The Hartley carriage stood waiting, but a crowd had gathered, curious onlookers drawn by the commotion, street vendors and passers-by who sensed drama and had stopped to watch. "Is that the jilted bride? Abandoned at the altar, poor creature. The Duke chose her cousin instead, I heard." Evangeline stumbled, and Agatha's arm tightened around her waist. "Don't listen to them. Into the carriage. Quickly." Once inside, with the curtains drawn against the prying eyes, Evangeline finally broke. Great, wrenching sobs tore from her throat as the full horror of what had happened crashed over her. She had been humiliated before everyone who mattered in London society. Her engagement was destroyed, her reputation in tatters, her family's name dragged through the mud, and all because the man she was supposed to marry had fallen in love with her own cousin. How could she? Evangeline gasped between sobs. How could Rosalind do this to me? We were like sisters. Agatha's face was grim as she produced a handkerchief. Some people are capable of extraordinary selfishness when they want something badly enough. Your cousin is beautiful, charming, and utterly without conscience. But I trusted her. She stood in the morning room this very day and smiled at me, wished me happiness, all while knowing. I know, child, I know. Agatha's voice softened slightly. Betrayal from those we love cuts deepest. But you must listen to me now, Evangeline. What happened today was not your fault. The Duke is a coward and a scoundrel, and your cousin is a viper. You are the victim of their cruelty, nothing more. But Evangeline couldn't accept that comfort. In her mind, she replayed every interaction with Sterling, searching for signs she had missed. Had he seemed distant during their engagement? Yes, but she had attributed it to his reserved nature. Had he asked questions about Rosalind? She couldn't remember. Had there been moments when her cousin's smiles had seemed false, her affection strained? The carriage jolted to a stop outside Hartley House, and Evangeline realized with fresh horror that she would have to face the servants, face her mother, face the wreckage of the wedding breakfast that had been prepared for guests who would never come. Inside, the house was in turmoil. Servants rushed about, their faces carefully blank but their eyes filled with pity. The dining room, which had been decorated with white roses and ribbons, stood empty and mocking. The wedding cake, a towering confection of sugar and cream, waited on its silver stand like a monument to shattered dreams. Lady Hartley had returned ahead of them and was in the drawing room, being attended by her own maid with smelling salts. When she saw Evangeline, her face crumpled. "Ruined," she moaned. "We are utterly ruined. How will we ever show our faces in society again? The invitations will stop, the doors will close. Oh, Evangeline, how could you let this happen?" "How could I?" Evangeline stared at her mother in disbelief. "Mama, I did nothing. I was the one abandoned. You must have done something to drive him away. Been too cold, too dull, too—" "That is quite enough, Margaret." Agatha's voice cracked like a whip. "Your daughter has been publicly humiliated through no fault of her own, and you dare to blame her. Have you no maternal feeling whatsoever?" Lady Hartley drew herself up, her face flushing. "How dare you speak to me in such a manner in my own home?" "I dare because someone must. Evangeline needs support, not recrimination. What Evangeline needs is to disappear from London until this scandal dies down, if it ever does." Lady Hartley pressed a handkerchief to her eyes. "Perhaps we can send her to your brother in Scotland, or to the continent, somewhere far away where no one knows what happened." "You want to exile her?" Agatha's voice was dangerously quiet. "I want to salvage what remains of this family's reputation." Evangeline listened to them argue as though from a great distance. She felt hollow, emptied out, as though all the life had been drained from her body. Her wedding gown suddenly felt unbearably heavy, the pearls in her hair like weights dragging her down. "I need to be alone," she whispered, and without waiting for permission, she fled upstairs to her room. Mary was there, quietly removing the wedding decorations that had been hung that morning, white ribbons, orange blossoms, symbols of joy that now seemed obscene. When she saw Evangeline, she immediately moved to help her out of the elaborate gown. "Oh, Miss Evangeline," she murmured, her own eyes red with tears, "I'm so very sorry." "Everyone is sorry," Evangeline said numbly. But sorry doesn't change what happened. Sorry doesn't make me less of a laughingstock. As the gown fell away, Evangeline caught sight of herself in the mirror. Her face was blotchy from crying, her carefully arranged hair coming loose, the diamond necklace at her throat glittering with obscene cheerfulness. She looked like a ghost of the hopeful girl who had dressed that morning. "Your tears mean nothing to me," Sterling had said those exact words to her once, months ago, when she had cried at a particularly moving opera performance. He had looked at her with faint disdain, as though her emotion was a weakness, a flaw. She should have known then. She should have seen what he truly was. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Agatha entered without waiting for permission, carrying a tea tray. "Drink this," she commanded, pouring a cup and pressing it into Evangeline's hands, "and then we're going to talk about your future." "I have no future," Evangeline said dully. "My reputation is destroyed. No respectable man will ever want to marry me now. I'll be a spinster, a cautionary tale, the girl who wasn't good enough to keep her duke." "Nonsense." Agatha settled into a chair, her expression thoughtful. "You're 20 years old, Evangeline. Your life is far from over. In fact, I would argue that it's only just beginning." "How can you say that after what happened today?" "Because I know something you don't yet understand." Agatha leaned forward, her grey eyes intense. "You've been given a gift, child. A terrible, painful gift, but a gift nonetheless. You've been freed from a loveless marriage to a man who would have made you miserable. Yes, the manner of it was cruel, and yes, you've been hurt. But now you have something precious, the chance to choose your own path." Evangeline shook her head. "You don't understand. In society's eyes, I'm ruined, tainted. No one will—" "Society's eyes can go blind for all I care," Agatha interrupted. "Listen to me. I'm leaving for Bath next week. Come with me. Leave London. Leave this house. Leave all of this behind. In Bath, no one knows you. You can be whoever you want to be." "Run away, you mean?" "I mean escape. There's a difference." Agatha's voice softened. "You need time to heal, Evangeline. Time away from your mother's recriminations and society's whispers. Time to remember who you are beyond being the Duke of Ravenscroft's rejected bride." Evangeline looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly. The idea of leaving London, of escaping the scene of her humiliation, was tempting, but it also felt like admitting defeat. "Think about it," Agatha said, rising. "You don't have to decide tonight. But know that the offer stands. You have an aunt who loves you and a future that's still unwritten." After she left, Evangeline sat in the gathering darkness, still wearing her undergarments and the diamond necklace, feeling the weight of the day settle over her like a shroud. Somewhere in London, Sterling and Rosalind were together, celebrating their love, while she sat alone in the ruins of her dreams. But beneath the pain and humiliation, something else was beginning to stir, a small, fierce spark of anger. They had betrayed her, humiliated her, treated her as though her feelings meant nothing. And perhaps, just perhaps, Aunt Agatha was right. Perhaps this was not an ending, but a beginning. The tears that fell now were different, still bitter, still painful, but mixed with something new, something that felt almost like determination. 3 weeks after the wedding that never was, Evangeline stood on the platform at Paddington Station, watching porters load her trunks onto the Bath-bound train. The morning was grey and drizzling, matching the melancholy that had settled over her like a second skin. Her mother had barely spoken to her since that terrible day, communicating only through terse notes delivered by servants. Her father had locked himself in his study, emerging only to rage about the Duke's perfidy and the irreparable damage to the Hartley name. The few callers who had come to the house had been turned away, and the invitations that once flooded their hall table had dried up entirely. London had rendered its verdict. Evangeline Hartley was a figure of pity at best, a social pariah at worst. "Ready, child?" Aunt Agatha appeared at her elbow, dressed in a practical travelling suit of deep burgundy, her grey hair pinned severely beneath a sensible hat. She carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had long ago stopped caring what society thought of her. "As ready as I'll ever be," Evangeline replied quietly. The journey to Bath took several hours, the countryside rolling past in shades of green and gold as summer gave way to early autumn. Evangeline pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching England slide by, and tried not to think about the gossip that must still be circulating through London's drawing rooms. The Duke of Ravenscroft had married Rosalind in a quiet ceremony just 1 week after the scandal. She had learned through Mary, who heard it from a footman, who heard it from a lady's maid. They had retreated to his country estate in Derbyshire, away from the furor they had created. Evangeline wondered if they were happy, if their love was worth the destruction they had caused. Then she forced herself to stop wondering, because that way lay only madness and more tears. Bath revealed itself gradually as the train approached. Elegant Georgian crescents climbing the hills, the Abbey's tower piercing the sky, the River Avon winding through the valley like a silver ribbon. It was beautiful in a way that London, for all its grandeur, was not. There was something gentler here, more human in scale. Agatha's house stood on the Royal Crescent, a graceful townhouse with honey-coloured stone and tall windows that caught the afternoon light. Inside, it was furnished with comfortable elegance, none of the oppressive formality of Hartley House, but rather an eclectic collection of books, art, and curiosities that Agatha had gathered during her travels. "Your room overlooks the gardens," Agatha said, leading Evangeline upstairs. "I thought you might appreciate the quiet." The room was lovely, papered in soft blue, with a four-poster bed, a writing desk by the window, and shelves already filled with books. Evangeline felt something in her chest loosen slightly. This was not a prison. This was a sanctuary. "Thank you, Aunt Agatha," she said, and meant it. "Don't thank me yet. I have plans for you, my dear, and they don't involve moping about feeling sorry for yourself." Agatha's tone was brisk, but not unkind. "Tomorrow we begin your rehabilitation." Evangeline wasn't sure what that meant, but she was too exhausted to ask. That night, she slept more soundly than she had in weeks, lulled by the unfamiliar quiet of Bath after London's constant noise. The next morning, Agatha appeared at breakfast with a determined expression. "We're going to the pump room," she announced. "It's time you rejoined the world." "Aunt Agatha, I'm not sure I'm ready." "Nonsense. You'll never be ready if you wait for readiness to arrive. Besides, Bath society is different from London. More forgiving, more interested in ideas than scandal. You'll see." The pump room was an elegant space filled with morning light and the gentle murmur of conversation. Ladies and gentlemen strolled about, taking the waters, discussing literature and politics and the latest scientific discoveries. Agatha seemed to know everyone, and she introduced Evangeline with a casual confidence that brooked no questions. "My niece, Miss Evangeline Hartley, visiting from London. She has a keen interest in literature and natural philosophy." "Did she?" Evangeline had never been allowed to express such interest before. Her education had been designed to make her an ornament. A little French, a little music, enough knowledge to make polite conversation, but not enough to have actual opinions. But the people Agatha introduced her to seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts. Mrs. Blackwood, a widow with sharp eyes and sharper wit, engaged her in a discussion about the latest novel by Miss Austen. Mr. Thornbury, a retired professor, asked her opinion on the recent reforms in education. No one mentioned dukes or weddings or scandals. "You see," Agatha murmured as they left, "the world is larger than you thought." Over the following weeks, Evangeline found herself drawn into Agatha's circle, a collection of artists, writers, reformers, and intellectuals who gathered regularly at her aunt's house for what Agatha called her salons. They discussed everything from women's rights to scientific discoveries to the poetry of Wordsworth and Coleridge. Evangeline, who had been taught that ladies should never express strong opinions, found herself tentatively offering her own thoughts and being met with interest rather than censure. "You have a good mind," Mrs. Blackwood told her one evening. "It's been wasted on needlework and watercolours." I was educated to be a wife, Evangeline said quietly. Then be grateful you escaped that fate. Now you can be educated to be yourself. It was a radical thought, and it lodged in Evangeline's mind like a seed. One crisp October afternoon, Agatha took her to a lecture at the Bath Literary and Scientific Institution. The speaker was a physician recently returned from studying in Edinburgh, and his topic was the new understanding of infectious diseases and public health. Evangeline found herself fascinated, despite having no background in science. The speaker, Dr. Elias Reed, was perhaps 35, with dark hair touched with grey at the temples and intelligent hazel eyes that seemed to see everything. He spoke with passion about improving conditions for the poor, about the connection between sanitation and health, about the moral obligation of those with knowledge to help those without. He's quite brilliant, Agatha whispered. And unmarried, I might add. Aunt Agatha. Evangeline felt her cheeks flush. I'm merely observing. He's also from Yorkshire originally, not one of your London aristocrats. A self-made man, which makes him far more interesting in my opinion. After the lecture, Agatha insisted on introducing them. Dr. Reed's handshake was firm, his smile genuine. Miss Hartley, did you enjoy the lecture? Very much, Evangeline said, surprised to find she meant it, though I confess much of the medical terminology was beyond me. But your arguments about public health reform were compelling. Were they? He looked pleased. Most ladies find such topics indelicate. Most ladies are taught not to think about unpleasant realities, Evangeline replied, then immediately worried she had been too bold. But Dr. Reed laughed, a warm, genuine sound. How refreshingly honest. Tell me, Miss Hartley, what brings you to Bath? You don't have the look of someone taking the waters for their health. I'm visiting my aunt. A change of scene from London. Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or sympathy. Did he know about the scandal? But if he did, he gave no sign of it. Well, I hope Bath agrees with you. It's a good place for new beginnings. He turned to Agatha. Mrs. Hartley, I'm giving another lecture next month on the work being done at the new hospital. I hope you and your niece will attend. We wouldn't miss it, Agatha assured him. As they walked home through the autumn twilight, Evangeline found herself thinking about Dr. Reed's words. New beginnings. Was that possible? Could she truly leave behind the humiliation of London and become someone new? He liked you, Agatha observed. He was being polite. Elias Reed is many things, but falsely polite is not one of them. If he didn't want to talk to you, he would have made his excuses and left. Instead, he engaged you in actual conversation, as though your thoughts mattered, because they do. Evangeline felt a small, unfamiliar warmth in her chest. When was the last time someone had looked at her and seen a person rather than a title or a scandal or a disappointment? The weeks passed, and Evangeline found herself settling into Bath's rhythms. She attended Agatha's salons, where she met poets and painters and passionate advocates for reform. She read voraciously from her aunt's extensive library, not just novels, but philosophy, history, and natural science. She took long walks through the city, discovering its hidden gardens and quiet corners. And she saw Dr. Reed again, at lectures and gatherings, where they fell into easy conversation about books and ideas. He never asked about her past, never treated her with the pity she had come to dread. He simply talked to her as though she were his intellectual equal, which was more intoxicating than any flattery. You're different, Agatha observed one evening as they sat by the fire. Lighter somehow, as though a weight has been lifted. Evangeline considered this. I think perhaps I'm becoming myself. I never had the chance before. I was always being shaped into what others wanted me to be, the perfect daughter, the perfect bride. But here, no one expects me to be anything but Evangeline. And who is Evangeline, do you think? I'm not entirely sure yet, but I'm beginning to find out. That night, as she prepared for bed, Evangeline caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked different, her eyes brighter, her expression less haunted. The girl who had stood at the altar in St. George's Church seemed like someone from another lifetime. She thought of Sterling Ashford, cold and dismissive, and realized with some surprise that she no longer felt the sharp pain of his rejection. Instead, she felt something closer to relief. If he had married her, she would never have come to Bath. She would never have discovered Agatha's world of ideas and possibilities. She would never have met people who valued her mind over her connections. She would never have met Dr. Elias Reed, whose hazel eyes seemed to see not the scandal or the shame, but simply her. As she climbed into bed, Evangeline allowed herself something she hadn't felt in months: hope. Not for a grand romance or a fairy tale ending, but for something perhaps more valuable: the chance to discover who she truly was and who she might become. Outside her window, Bath slept peacefully under a canopy of stars, and for the first time since that terrible day in London, Evangeline Hartley felt like she might actually have a future worth living. Winter arrived in Bath with a crystalline beauty that transformed the city into something from a fairy tale. Frost etched delicate patterns on windows, and the Roman baths steamed in the cold air like something magical. Evangeline had been in Bath for 4 months now, and the transformation in her was remarkable. She no longer flinched at the mention of London or weddings. She had stopped checking the society pages for news of the Duke and Duchess of Ravenscroft. Instead, she spent her days reading, attending lectures, and engaging in the kind of intellectual discourse that would have scandalized her mother, but made her feel truly alive for the first time in her life. And there was Dr. Elias Reed. Their friendship had deepened gradually, naturally, like a plant growing towards sunlight. They met at lectures and salons, took walks along the river discussing everything from medical ethics to poetry, and discovered a remarkable compatibility of mind and temperament. He made her laugh with his dry wit, challenged her assumptions with gentle questions, and never once treated her as though she were fragile or damaged. "You're falling in love with him," Agatha observed one morning over breakfast, her tone matter of fact. Evangeline nearly choked on her tea. "I am not. That is, we're merely friends. My dear child, I may be old, but I'm not blind. The way you light up when he enters a room, the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching, it's perfectly obvious to everyone except apparently the two of you." "Even if that were true," Evangeline said carefully, "Doctor, Reed has given no indication that he regards me as anything more than a friend, and after what happened with Sterling, I'm not sure I'm ready for happiness? For a man who actually deserves you?" Agatha set down her teacup with a decisive click. "Evangeline, you cannot let one scoundrel's cruelty prevent you from living. Besides, I happen to know that Elias is planning to ask you to accompany him to the Winter Assembly next week." "How could you possibly know that?" "Because he asked my permission first, like the gentleman he is." Agatha smiled. "So when he asks, say yes. It's time you return to society properly, and there's no better escort than a respected physician with impeccable character." The Winter Assembly was Bath's most prestigious social event, held in the elegant assembly rooms with their glittering chandeliers and polished floors. Evangeline's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of entering a ballroom again brought back visceral memories of St. George's Church. But Agatha was right. She couldn't hide forever. When Dr. Reed called that afternoon, Evangeline received him in Agatha's drawing room, her heart beating faster than she cared to admit. "Miss Hartley," he began, seeming slightly nervous, which she found endearing, "I wonder if you might do me the honor of accompanying me to the Winter Assembly next Friday. I realize it's rather short notice, and if you'd prefer not to—" "I would be delighted," Evangeline heard herself say, surprising them both. His smile was radiant. "Truly? I confess I was worried you might refuse. I know you've been avoiding large social gatherings." "I have been, but I think it's time I stopped hiding." She met his eyes. "And I can think of no one I'd rather attend with than you, Dr. Reed." "Elias," he said softly. "Please, call me Elias. We've been friends long enough for such formality to be unnecessary." "Then you must call me Evangeline." The week that followed was a flurry of preparation. Agatha insisted on commissioning a new gown, a stunning creation in deep sapphire silk that brought out the auburn highlights in Evangeline's hair and made her grey eyes appear almost luminous. It was elegant without being ostentatious, sophisticated without trying too hard. When Evangeline looked at herself in the mirror on the evening of the assembly, she saw not a jilted bride, but a woman of substance and grace. "You look magnificent," Agatha declared. "Now go show Bath Society what they've been missing." Elias arrived promptly at 7, looking distinguished in his formal evening attire. When he saw Evangeline, his expression made her feel beautiful in a way that Sterling's cool appraisals never had. "You're breathtaking," he said simply, offering his arm. The assembly rooms were ablaze with light and music when they arrived. Evangeline felt a moment of panic as they entered the ballroom. So many people, so many eyes, but Elias's steady presence beside her was an anchor. "We don't have to stay long if you're uncomfortable," he murmured. "Just say the word." But as they moved through the crowd, Evangeline realized something surprising. People were genuinely pleased to see her. Mrs. Blackwood swept over immediately, complimenting her gown. Mr. Thornbury engaged Elias in a discussion about his hospital work, while including Evangeline in the conversation. Young ladies she had met at various lectures smiled and waved. This was nothing like London society, with its rigid hierarchies and vicious gossip. Bath society was more forgiving, more interested in character than scandal. "May I have this dance?" Elias asked, as a waltz began. Evangeline hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. As they moved onto the floor, she felt the last of her anxiety melt away. Elias was an excellent dancer, leading her with confidence and grace, and being in his arms felt natural, right, in a way that nothing with Sterling ever had. "You're smiling," he observed. "I am, aren't I? I didn't think I'd ever enjoy a ball again." "I'm glad you're enjoying this one." His expression grew more serious. "Evangeline, there's something I've been wanting to say to you. These past months getting to know you have been among the happiest of my life. You're brilliant, kind, and remarkably brave, and well, how touching." The voice cut through the music like a blade of ice. Evangeline froze, her blood turning cold, because she knew that voice. She had heard it dismiss her tears, reject her at the altar, destroy her life. Sterling Ashford, Duke of Ravenscroft, stood at the edge of the dance floor, Rosalind on his arm. They made a striking couple. Sterling in his impeccable evening clothes, his dark hair and grey eyes as commanding as ever, and Rosalind in a gown of emerald green that complemented her golden beauty. But there was something off about them, Evangeline noticed with a strange detachment. Sterling's smile didn't reach his eyes, and Rosalind's laugh seemed forced. "Your Grace," Elias said coolly, his arm tightening protectively around Evangeline's waist. "I wasn't aware you were in Bath." "A brief visit. My wife wanted to take the waters." Sterling's gaze fixed on Evangeline with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Miss Hartley, you're looking well. Quite different from the last time I saw you." Evangeline found her voice, surprised by its steadiness. "I am well, Your Grace. Thank you for your concern, though it comes rather late." Rosalind's eyes narrowed. "Evie, darling, I've been meaning to write to you, to explain—" "There's nothing to explain, Rosalind. You wanted the Duke and you got him. I hope you're very happy together." The words came out with a calmness Evangeline didn't entirely feel, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her distressed. "We are," Sterling said, but there was something hollow in his tone. Deliriously so. "How fortunate." Elias's voice was polite but cold. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we were in the middle of a dance." He swept Evangeline away before Sterling could respond, guiding her to the far side of the ballroom. Evangeline's hands were shaking, and she gripped Elias's shoulder to steady herself. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "I think so. I wasn't prepared to see them. Would you like to leave?" Evangeline looked back across the ballroom to where Sterling and Rosalind stood, watching her. Sterling's expression was strange, almost regretful, which made no sense. Rosalind looked petulant, as though Evangeline's composure had somehow disappointed her. And suddenly, Evangeline realized something. They had expected her to fall apart. They had expected tears, hysteria, a scene. They had expected to find her broken. Instead, they found her dancing with a good man, surrounded by friends, clearly thriving. "No," Evangeline said firmly. "I don't want to leave. I want to stay and enjoy the evening. I won't let them drive me away." Elias's smile was proud. "That's my girl." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of music and conversation. Evangeline danced with Elias, with Mr. Thornbury, with several other gentlemen from Agatha's circle. She laughed at jokes, discussed the latest books, and generally conducted herself with a grace and confidence that surprised even her. And all the while, she was aware of Sterling watching her from across the room, not with his usual cold indifference, but with something that looked almost like longing. Rosalind, meanwhile, grew increasingly irritable, snapping at her husband and drinking more champagne than was strictly proper. "They're miserable," Mrs. Blackwood observed, appearing at Evangeline's elbow during a break in the dancing. "Anyone with eyes can see it. He's realizing he made a terrible mistake, and she's discovering that being a duchess isn't quite the fairy tale she imagined." "I don't care," Evangeline said, and realized it was true. "Whatever they're feeling, whatever they're going through, it's no longer my concern." "Good girl. Now I believe Dr. Reed is looking for you, and unless I'm very much mistaken, he's about to do something rather important." Elias found her on the terrace, where she had stepped out for some air. The night was cold and clear, stars brilliant overhead, and Bath spread out below them in a carpet of lights. "Evangeline," he said, taking her hands in his. "I started to say something earlier, before we were interrupted. May I finish now?" Her heart was pounding. "Please do. These past months have been extraordinary. You've challenged me, inspired me, made me laugh, and made me think. You're the most remarkable woman I've ever met, and I find myself completely, hopelessly in love with you." He paused, searching her face. "I know you've been hurt. I know you have every reason to be cautious. But I'm not Sterling Ashford. I would never dismiss your tears or treat your feelings as worthless. I would spend every day of my life trying to make you happy if you'd let me." Evangeline felt tears prick her eyes, but these were different from the bitter tears she had shed in London. These were tears of joy, of relief, of coming home. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for weeks now, but I was afraid to admit it." "Then don't be afraid anymore." He cupped her face gently. "Marry me, Evangeline. Not because society expects it or because it's a good match, but because we choose each other, because we're happy together, because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, Elias, I'll marry you." He kissed her then, gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Evangeline felt the last pieces of her broken heart knit back together, stronger than before. When they returned to the ballroom, hand in hand, the news spread quickly. Agatha beamed with satisfaction. Mrs. Blackwood and the others offered enthusiastic congratulations, and across the room, Sterling Ashford watched with an expression of profound regret as the woman he had rejected found happiness with a better man. Evangeline met his gaze one last time and smiled, not with triumph or bitterness, but with genuine contentment. Then she turned away, toward her future, and didn't look back. The announcement of Evangeline Hartley's engagement to Dr. Elias Reed appeared in the Bath Chronicle 3 days after the Winter Assembly, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. Unlike the scandal that had surrounded her broken engagement to the Duke of Ravenscroft, this news was met with genuine warmth and approval. "A love match," Mrs. Blackwood declared at Agatha's salon the following week. "How refreshing in this age of mercenary marriages." "Dr. Reed is a fortunate man," Mr. Thornbury added, "though I suspect he knows it." Evangeline, seated beside Elias on the sofa, felt a contentment she had never known before. This was what happiness felt like, not the anxious anticipation of her first engagement, but a deep, steady certainty that she had made the right choice. The news reached London within days, of course. Evangeline received a stiff letter from her mother expressing surprise that she had accepted a proposal from a mere physician without consulting her family, but grudgingly acknowledging that at least Evangeline would be respectably married. Her father sent a brief note saying he would attend the wedding, though his tone suggested it was more out of duty than enthusiasm. Only one letter truly mattered to Evangeline, a warm, affectionate note from her younger brother Thomas, who was away at Oxford. "I'm so glad you've found happiness, Evie," he wrote. "Reed sounds like a decent fellow, which is more than could be said for that pompous Duke. I look forward to meeting him." But there was one response Evangeline hadn't anticipated. She was walking through the Sydney Gardens with Elias on a crisp February afternoon when a familiar figure appeared on the path ahead. Sterling Ashford stood alone without Rosalind, his greatcoat pulled tight against the cold. When he saw them, he stopped, and for a moment Evangeline thought he might turn away. Instead, he approached. "Miss Hartley, Dr. Reed." His voice was formal, but there was something strained in his expression. "Might I have a word with Miss Hartley? Privately." Elias looked at Evangeline, his expression questioning. She squeezed his hand reassuringly. "It's all right. I'll only be a moment." Elias nodded, though his eyes remained wary as he moved a discreet distance away. Sterling waited until he was out of earshot before speaking. "I wanted to congratulate you on your engagement," he began, his grey eyes fixed on her face. "Dr. Reed seems a worthy man." "He is," Evangeline said simply. "Was that all, Your Grace?" "No." Sterling's composure cracked slightly. "I wanted to apologize for what I did to you, for how I did it. It was cruel and cowardly, and you deserved far better." Evangeline studied him, this man who had once held her entire future in his hands. He looked different somehow, older, more worn, as though the past months had taken a toll. There were shadows under his eyes, and his usual arrogant bearing seemed diminished. "Why now?" she asked. "Why apologize months after the fact?" "Because I've come to realize what I threw away." His voice was low, almost anguished. "Rosalind is beautiful, charming, everything I thought I wanted. But she's also shallow, demanding, and utterly self-absorbed. She married me for my title and my wealth, not for any genuine affection. We barely speak anymore, except to argue." "I'm sorry to hear that," Evangeline said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "But I'm not sure why you're telling me this." "Because I was a fool." Sterling took a step closer, his expression intense. "I see that now. You were kind, intelligent, genuine, everything a man could want in a wife. And I dismissed you as dull, as beneath me. I was blinded by Rosalind's superficial charms and my own arrogance. Your Grace, I know it's too late," he continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I know you're engaged to Reed, and I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I needed you to know that I regret what I did, that if I could go back and make a different choice. But you can't," Evangeline interrupted gently but firmly. "What's done is done, Sterling. You made your choice, and I've made mine, and I'm grateful for it." He stared at her. "Grateful? Yes. If you had married me, I would have spent my life trying to please a man who found me inadequate. I would have been miserable, and so would you. Your rejection, as painful as it was, freed me to discover who I truly am and what I truly want. It led me to Bath, to my aunt's circle, to Elias. So yes, I'm grateful." Sterling's face had gone pale. "You're happy then? Truly happy?" "Happier than I ever thought possible." Evangeline glanced back at Elias, who was waiting patiently, his expression warm and trusting. "Elias sees me, Sterling. Not my family name or my connections or what I can do for his social standing. He sees me, my thoughts, my feelings, my dreams. He values my mind and respects my opinions. He makes me laugh and challenges me to be better. That's what love should be. Indeed, and I never gave you any of that, Sterling said quietly. No, you didn't, but I don't blame you anymore. We would have been terribly wrong for each other. You need someone who shares your world, your values, and I need someone who sees beyond all of that to the person underneath. Sterling was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. I heard something disturbing recently, he said finally, from my physician in London. He says I've been experiencing strange symptoms, fatigue, weakness, moments where I lose time. He's concerned it might be something serious, though he can't identify what. He mentioned that the condition might worsen, that I might need specialized care. A chill ran through Evangeline, despite the afternoon sun. I'm sorry to hear that. Have you sought other opinions? I planned to, but it made me think about mortality, about regrets, about the choices we make and can't unmake. He looked at her directly. I hope you'll be very happy, Evangeline. You deserve it far more than I ever did. I hope you find peace, Sterling, and perhaps in time, you and Rosalind can find some understanding with each other. Perhaps. But his tone suggested he didn't believe it. He bowed formally and walked away, his figure growing smaller as he disappeared down the path. Evangeline watched him go, feeling an unexpected pang of sympathy. He had everything society valued, title, wealth, position, and yet he seemed profoundly unhappy. Are you all right? Elias asked, returning to her side. Yes, he wanted to apologize and to tell me he's been unwell. She slipped her arm through his. It's strange. I spent so long being angry at him, and now I just feel nothing, or perhaps pity. He has everything and nothing at the same time. While you, Elias said, kissing her temple, have chosen a life of purpose over a life of privilege, I'd say you made the better bargain. So would I. The weeks that followed were filled with wedding preparations, but these were joyful rather than stressful. Evangeline and Elias decided on a small ceremony at Bath Abbey, with only close friends and family in attendance. No grand spectacle, no society circus, just a genuine celebration of two people who had chosen each other freely. Agatha threw herself into the planning with enthusiasm, while Mrs. Blackwood and the other ladies from the salon offered their assistance. Evangeline's wedding gown was elegant but simple, cream silk with delicate embroidery, nothing like the elaborate confection she had worn for her first failed wedding. This time you're dressing for yourself, Agatha observed as they reviewed the final fitting. Not for society's expectations or your mother's ambitions. That makes all the difference. Lady Hartley arrived in Bath 2 days before the wedding, her manner still cool but slightly thawed. She inspected Elias with a critical eye during their first meeting, clearly prepared to find fault. But even she couldn't deny his intelligence, his respectability, or his obvious devotion to Evangeline. He's not a duke, she said to Evangeline privately, but I suppose he'll do. At least he won't humiliate you publicly. It was perhaps the closest thing to approval Evangeline would receive from her mother, and she accepted it with equanimity. Her mother's opinion no longer had the power to wound her. Her father and brother arrived the following day. Thomas embraced her warmly, declaring Elias a capital fellow, while her father shook Elias's hand with grudging respect. "You'll take care of my daughter," he said. It wasn't a question. "With my life, sir," Elias replied. The night before the wedding, Evangeline sat with Agatha in the drawing room, watching the fire crackle in the grate. "Are you nervous?" Agatha asked. "Not at all. Is that strange?" "Not in the least. It means you're certain of your choice." Agatha reached over and squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you, Evangeline. You've transformed yourself from a frightened girl into a confident woman. That takes remarkable courage. I couldn't have done it without you. You gave me a refuge when I needed it most, and you showed me that there was more to life than what I'd been taught." I merely opened the door. You were the one brave enough to walk through it. That night, Evangeline slept peacefully, without doubts or fears. When she woke on her wedding day, the sun was streaming through her windows, and she felt nothing but joy. The ceremony at Bath Abbey was everything her first wedding was not. Intimate, genuine, filled with love. Evangeline walked down the aisle on her father's arm, but her eyes were only for Elias, who stood at the altar with such open happiness on his face that several guests dabbed at their eyes. When the vicar asked if anyone objected to the union, there was only warm silence. And when Elias slipped the ring onto her finger and promised to love and cherish her all his days, Evangeline knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be. "I love you," she whispered as they were pronounced husband and wife. "And I love you," Elias replied, kissing her gently. "My brilliant, brave, beautiful Evangeline." The wedding breakfast was held at Agatha's house, filled with laughter and genuine celebration. Even Evangeline's mother seemed to unbend slightly, admitting that the match was more suitable than she had initially thought. As the afternoon wore on and guests began to depart, Evangeline stood with Elias on the terrace, looking out over Bath. "Ready to begin our life together?" he asked. "More than ready. Where shall we go?" "I've been offered a position at a new hospital in Manchester," Elias said. "It's pioneering work in public health, exactly the kind of thing I've always wanted to do. But it would mean leaving Bath, starting fresh in a new city. What do you think?" Evangeline smiled, feeling a thrill of excitement rather than fear. "I think it sounds perfect. A new city, a new life, new possibilities. Let's go make a difference together." "Together," Elias agreed, pulling her close. "Always together." As the sun set over Bath, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Evangeline reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The humiliation at St. George's Church seemed like something from another lifetime, something that had happened to a different person entirely. She had been broken and remade, and in the remaking she had discovered her true self. She had found love, purpose, and freedom. And as she stood in her husband's arms, looking toward their future, she knew that every tear, every moment of pain had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment of happiness. Manchester in the spring of 1818 was a city of contrasts, soaring industrial chimneys alongside elegant Georgian squares, grinding poverty mere streets away from comfortable prosperity. It was noisy, dirty, vital, and alive in a way that neither London nor Bath had been. Evangeline loved it immediately. She and Elias had arrived 6 months earlier, settling into a modest but comfortable house near the new hospital where Elias had taken his position. The work was demanding. Long hours, difficult cases, the constant struggle to improve conditions for the city's poorest residents. But it was also deeply meaningful. And Evangeline had found her own purpose alongside her husband's. "Mrs. Reed, the mothers are arriving for today's class," called Sarah Mitchell, a young woman from the neighborhood whom Evangeline had hired as her assistant. Evangeline set down her pen. She had been writing an article on infant nutrition for a progressive medical journal, and moved to the front room of the small building they had rented. It had once been a shop, but Evangeline had transformed it into something unprecedented, a center where working-class women could come to learn about health, hygiene, and childcare. The idea had been born from her observations during her first weeks in Manchester. She had accompanied Elias on his rounds through the poorest districts and been horrified by the conditions. Families of 8 living in single rooms, children dying of preventable diseases, mothers exhausted and ignorant of basic health principles, not through any fault of their own, but because no one had ever taught them. "Someone should do something," she had said to Elias one evening. "Why not you?" he had replied. And so she had. With Elias's medical knowledge and her own determination, Evangeline had created a program to educate women about sanitation, nutrition, and disease prevention. She had faced resistance at first, from wealthy donors who thought it improper for a lady to involve herself in such matters, from the women themselves who were suspicious of a gentlewoman's motives. But Evangeline had persisted, and gradually trust had been built. Now 12 women crowded into the room, some with babies on their hips, others heavily pregnant. They came from the mills and factories, from cramped tenements and desperate circumstances, but they came because Evangeline treated them with respect and gave them knowledge that could save their children's lives. "Good morning, everyone," Evangeline said warmly. "Today we're going to discuss the importance of clean water and how to recognize when water isn't safe to drink." As she taught, demonstrating simple filtration methods and explaining how contaminated water spread disease, Evangeline felt a deep satisfaction. This was real work, meaningful work. She was using her education and privilege not to ornament a drawing room, but to make a tangible difference in people's lives. After the class ended, she walked home through the bustling streets, her mind already planning the next session. The house was quiet when she arrived. Elias was still at the hospital, so she settled at her desk to continue her article. She was deep in concentration when a knock at the door interrupted her. Sarah had left for the day, so Evangeline answered it herself, surprised to find a well-dressed gentleman on her doorstep. He was perhaps 40, with greying hair and an air of professional competence. "Mrs. Reed, I'm Dr. William Thornton from London. I apologize for calling unannounced, but I'm here on a rather urgent matter concerning the Duke of Ravenscroft." Evangeline's heart skipped. She hadn't heard Sterling's name in months, had barely thought of him. "I'm not sure how I can help you, Dr. Thornton. The Duke and I have no connection." "I understand, but please, if I might have a moment of your time. It's a matter of some delicacy." Reluctantly, Evangeline showed him into the parlor. "Doctor." Thornton settled into a chair, his expression grave. "I'll be direct, Mrs. Reed. The Duke of Ravenscroft is dying." The words hung in the air like a death knell. Evangeline felt a chill despite the warm spring afternoon. "Dying? Of what?" "That's the problem. We don't know. He's been deteriorating for months now. Severe fatigue, episodes of paralysis, cognitive difficulties. We've consulted every specialist in London, tried every treatment, but nothing helps. He grows weaker by the day." "Doctor." Thornton leaned forward. "But there's something strange. In his lucid moments, he keeps asking for you. He says you're the only one who can help him, though he can't or won't explain why." "That's absurd. I have no medical training beyond what I've learned from my husband. How could I possibly—" "I don't know, Mrs. Reed, but he's desperate, and frankly so am I. I've exhausted every avenue of conventional medicine. If there's even a chance that you know something, see something we've missed." He broke off, running a hand through his hair. "I know I have no right to ask this of you. I know what he did to you, but he's a young man, and he's dying, and he believes you're his only hope." Evangeline sat in stunned silence. Sterling, dying. The proud, arrogant Duke who had dismissed her tears and broken her heart? It seemed impossible, and yet Dr. Thornton's distress was clearly genuine. "Where is he now?" "At his estate in Derbyshire. He's too weak to travel to London. His wife—" Dr. Thornton's expression soured slightly. "The Duchess has been less than helpful. She seems more concerned with securing her financial future than with her husband's health." Of course she was. Rosalind had married for title and wealth, not love. Now that Sterling was dying, she was probably already planning her wealthy widowhood. "I need to discuss this with my husband," Evangeline said finally. "This isn't a decision I can make alone. Of course, I'm staying at the Queen's Hotel. Please send word as soon as you can. Time is not on our side." After Dr. Thornton left, Evangeline sat in the gathering dusk, her mind whirling. She had built a new life, found happiness and purpose. The last thing she wanted was to be dragged back into Sterling Ashford's orbit. And yet, he was dying. Whatever he had done to her, did he deserve that? When Elias came home, she told him everything. He listened in silence, his expression thoughtful. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally. "I don't know. Part of me wants to refuse, to say it's not my problem. He certainly showed me no mercy when I needed it. But another part—" She broke off, struggling to articulate the feeling. "I'm not a cruel person, Elias. I can't just let him die if there's something I can do to help. Even after what he did to you. Even then, because I'm not him. I don't dismiss people's suffering as meaningless." She looked at her husband. "But I won't go without you. If I do this, we do it together." Elias took her hands. "Then we'll go to Derbyshire. We'll see what can be done. But Evangeline, don't expect gratitude or transformation. He's still the same man who hurt you. Dying doesn't automatically make someone noble." "I know, but I have to try." They sent word to Dr. Thornton that evening and made arrangements to travel to Derbyshire. Evangeline's students were disappointed, but understanding when she explained she would be away for a time. Sarah agreed to keep the centre running in her absence. The journey to Ravenscroft Hall took 2 days. The estate, when they finally arrived, was magnificent. A sprawling Elizabethan manor set in hundreds of acres of parkland. But there was something melancholy about it, as though the house itself was in mourning. They were received by the housekeeper, Mrs. Dalton, a stern-faced woman who looked exhausted. "Thank God you've come," she said quietly. "His Grace is in a bad way, and her Grace, well, she's not been much help." She led them upstairs to a suite of rooms where Sterling lay in a massive 4-poster bed, looking nothing like the commanding figure Evangeline remembered. He was gaunt, his skin pale and waxy, his dark hair lank against the pillows. His eyes were closed, and for a moment Evangeline thought he was unconscious. Then he opened them and saw her. "Evangeline," he whispered, "you came." "I came," she said, moving closer despite her instincts telling her to flee. "Dr. Thornton said you were ill. What's happened to you, Sterling?" "Dying," he said with a ghost of his old sardonic smile. "Rather dramatically, I'm afraid. The physicians say there's nothing to be done." "Why did you ask for me?" His eyes closed again. "Because you're the only one who ever really saw me. Not the title, not the wealth. Me. And because—" he struggled for breath, "because I wronged you terribly and I need to make it right before I die." Elias stepped forward, his physician's instincts taking over. "Your Grace, I'm Dr. Reed. May I examine you?" Over the next hour, Elias conducted a thorough examination while Evangeline watched. She saw her husband's frown deepen, saw him test Sterling's reflexes, check his eyes, ask detailed questions about symptoms and timeline. Finally, Elias stepped back, his expression troubled. "Your Grace, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Have you ingested anything unusual in recent months? Any new medicines, tonics, or supplements?" Sterling's brow furrowed. "Rosalind has been giving me a tonic. She said it would help with my fatigue." "Why?" Elias and Evangeline exchanged a look. "Where is this tonic now?" Elias asked carefully. "In the dressing room, the blue bottle." Elias retrieved it and uncorked it, sniffing carefully. His face went pale. "Evangeline, I need you to smell this. Tell me what you think." She did, and recognition hit her like a physical blow. She had smelled that distinctive bitter almond scent before, during one of her classes when discussing household poisons. "Arsenic," she whispered. Sterling's eyes flew open. "What?" "Your wife has been poisoning you," Elias said grimly. "Slowly, methodically, with arsenic. That's why you're dying, Your Grace. Not from disease, but from murder." The room seemed to spin. Evangeline gripped the bedpost for support as the full horror of it sank in. Rosalind, beautiful, charming Rosalind, was killing her husband for his wealth and title. "We need to confront her," Evangeline said, "and we need to stop her before—" The door burst open and Rosalind herself swept in, still beautiful, but with a hardness in her eyes that Evangeline had never noticed before. When she saw Evangeline and Elias, she stopped short. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "Saving your husband's life," Elias said coldly, holding up the blue bottle, "and preparing to see you arrested for attempted murder." Rosalind's face went white, then red. "You can't prove anything." "We can and will. Arsenic poisoning has very specific symptoms, all of which His Grace exhibits, and this bottle will be tested and found to contain arsenic, I have no doubt." For a moment, Rosalind looked like she might try to brazen it out. Then her composure cracked entirely. "He deserved it," she spat. "He promised me everything. Love, devotion, a fairy tale life. Instead, I got a cold, distant husband who regretted marrying me from the moment the vows were spoken. He made my life miserable, so I decided to end his and take what was owed to me." "You're insane," Sterling whispered from the bed. "No, I'm practical. But it seems I underestimated dear Evangeline once again." Rosalind's smile was vicious. "Always so good, so pure, so perfect. Even now you couldn't resist playing the hero." "I'm not a hero," Evangeline said quietly. "I'm just someone who believes that murder is wrong, no matter how unhappy you are." The authorities were summoned. Rosalind was arrested, screaming threats and accusations as she was led away. Dr. Thornton arrived and confirmed Elias's diagnosis, immediately beginning treatment to purge the arsenic from Sterling's system. "He'll live," Elias told Evangeline later that evening as they stood in the garden, both exhausted. "It will take time, but he'll recover. Because we came. Because you recognized the symptoms." Evangeline leaned against her husband. "You saved his life, Elias. We saved his life. You're the one who recognized the smell, who had the knowledge from your classes. Your work, your education, it made the difference." They stayed at Ravenscroft Hall for another week, ensuring Sterling's recovery was progressing. He was weak, but improving daily, the color returning to his face, his mind clearing. On their last day, he asked to speak with Evangeline privately. "I owe you my life," he said simply. "After everything I did to you, you still came, still helped. I don't deserve such grace. No one deserves grace, Sterling. That's what makes it grace." Evangeline smiled gently. "I hope you'll use this second chance wisely. Be a better man than you were." "I will try." "And Evangeline, thank you. Not just for saving my life, but for showing me what real strength looks like. You're extraordinary." "I'm just someone who chose to bloom where I was planted," she replied, "even when the soil was rocky and the weather harsh. We all have that choice." As she and Elias travelled back to Manchester, Evangeline reflected on the strange turn of events. She had faced her past, confronted the people who had hurt her and emerged stronger for it. Sterling would live, would have a chance to become better. Rosalind would face justice for her crimes. And Evangeline would return to her real life, to her students, her work, her purpose, to the man who loved her not for what she could give him, but for who she was. "Ready to go home?" Elias asked as Manchester's chimneys came into view. "More than ready," Evangeline said, taking his hand. "Let's go back to our life, our real, meaningful, beautiful life." And as the train pulled into the station, Evangeline smiled, knowing that she had finally found where she truly belonged. Not in a gilded cage or a grand estate, but in a modest house in an industrial city, doing work that mattered, with a man who saw her worth. She had bloomed exactly where she was planted, and the garden she had created was more beautiful than any fairy tale. As Evangeline and Elias stepped off the train in Manchester, the familiar sounds of the bustling city welcomed them home. The industrial smoke, the calls of street vendors, the clatter of carriages. It was a symphony of life, of purpose, of belonging. Their modest house stood waiting, and beyond it the center where women gathered to learn, to grow, to take control of their families' health and futures. Tomorrow, Evangeline would return to her classes, to her writing, to the meaningful work that filled her days with satisfaction. Elias would return to the hospital, to his patients, to the pioneering medical work that saved lives daily. They had built something real together, not a marriage of convenience or social advancement, but a partnership of equals, united by love and shared purpose. They had created a life where both could flourish, where their talents and passions could make a genuine difference in the world. As they walked through their front door, Evangeline paused to look back at the street, at the city that had become her true home. She thought of the frightened girl who had stood at the altar in St. George's Church, humiliated and broken, believing her life was over. That girl could never have imagined this future, this freedom, this joy, this profound sense of purpose. Sterling's cruel words echoed in her memory one last time. "Your tears mean nothing to me." But he had been wrong. Her tears had meant everything. They had watered the seeds of her transformation, nourished her growth, and helped her bloom into the woman she was always meant to be. She had saved Sterling's life not because he deserved it, but because she had become someone who chose compassion over bitterness, grace over revenge, purpose over pride. And in doing so, she had proven that true strength lies not in titles or wealth or social position, but in the courage to be kind, to be useful, and to choose one's own path. Elias wrapped his arm around her waist, and together they crossed the threshold into their home, into their future, into the beautiful, ordinary, extraordinary life they had chosen together. The Duke of Ravenscroft would recover and perhaps become a better man. Rosalind would face the consequences of her choices. London society would find new scandals to whisper about. But none of it mattered to Evangeline anymore. She had found something far more valuable than a coronet or a place in the peerage. She had found herself, and in the end, that was the greatest triumph of all. If you enjoyed this story, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening. I want to know how far this tale of transformation and redemption has traveled. Thank you for joining Evangeline on her journey from heartbreak to happiness, from humiliation to purpose, from tears that meant nothing to a life that means everything.